Hey everybody, welcome back to Blood Throne, Making the Game. I'm your host, Reece, and in this podcast we talk about the process of making our first board game, Blood Throne, from concept through the Kickstarter process and all the way to distribution and beyond. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the Inquisitor in depth. In this series, we do a deep dive into each of the classes in the core box, and eventually we'll get to the hero expansion as well. Talk about everything they have to offer and give you a little bit of background on the lore, the character themselves, how to play them, etc. Please forgive me if I sound a little off. I came down with a cold and I'm not feeling too hot, but we soldier on. So first of all, let's do a general update on where the project is at. In my last update on the Kickstarter and GameFound, I did a deep dive into it, so please go read those. But we're really close to going into pre-production for the core box and the Gorgontas expansion. Again, I'm sorry that I am behind schedule by a couple months. Everything at this final, basically editing and double checking everything, quality control is basically where we're at. Has taken longer than I thought, just as everything on this project has taken longer than I thought. But I've gained a lot of valuable experience, and in the future, I'll know how to do these things more efficiently and more streamlined. So basically, we're at the final steps of editing. I'm going through all the cards to make sure that there's no grammar or spelling errors, that all the right symbols are on all the cards. You know, there's hundreds of cards, so that's a pretty tall task. I'm going through the books and I'm editing everything, making sure that, again, there's no grammar or spelling errors, that the images look correct, all that sort of stuff. We're in the polish stage. The last kind of outstanding task is we're redoing the campaign map. The first one we did it really early on in the project, and it looks fine, but it's just, I feel like everything else has gotten so much better. We've added art to all the cards. We've added a ton of art to the books, and it kind of feels like a rough draft, so to speak. So I decided that we were going to redo that, and I should have that done this week. That's the last kind of creation level project, but now that we know how to do it, it should go relatively quickly. My business partner and I are going to dive into that this week and redo the map so that it looks better. And the campaign map, just in case you're wondering what I'm referring to, it's the map that the strategic level campaign takes place on. So there's a tactical level map, that's what you play the game on. And then there's the strategic level map, which is the area is called the Blinded Peninsula. The city is called Jasmir. It was wiped out in the Throne Wars, which occurs in the lore of the game. And Belphegor, the big bad guy, he has moved his crawling tower there to try and become a god himself. Excuse me, I had to clear my throat. So this is where the action takes place, and we wanted to redo the map to make it look just better. And I don't think it'll be a major project. So once we get through that, we go into pre-production. Pre-production should take 6 weeks. And that's what I was told. It could take up to 6 weeks. And that's when they go over everything to make sure that it's ready to print. And all the cards are correct. We had to redo the tokens a bunch of times, as I mentioned in the past, because they weren't printable. We had to redo them twice, and there's hundreds of tokens, and you have to do each one manually. It was such a pain in the rear end. But, this is a part of the learning process of making a game, especially a game that is, as big in scale as Blood Throne is. If you made a mistake, you have to redo something. It's oh boy, this is a major task. So at any rate, we're really excited. We're coming down the home. I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. Thank you for everyone being so patient. I know we're behind schedule, and I really did not want this to happen. I really wanted to do it on time for the first one, but you don't know what you don't know when you go into a new project, especially something as complex as this. And this genuinely has been the most complicated thing I've ever done in my life. I've started 5 businesses, including the current, Frontline Gaming, which is a game store manufacturing center. We do wholesale, we have social media, we create content. So I've done a lot in this industry, and this has by far been the most complicated thing I've ever done. I have a newfound respect for people like Cephalofair Games that they make one game and then their next one is Gloomhaven, which is sort of similar in complexity. Gloomhaven is a little bit more complex than Blood Throne is. But kind of similar in scope. And it's just like, wow, man, hats off to you, sir. Like, it's a big task. So at any rate, let's jump in and talk about the Inquisitor. I've been really excited to dive into this class. So the Inquisitor class is one I've been really eager to explore in this series, partially because I've always thought the Inquisitor class was really cool in any RPG I've ever played. But one of the problems that I had when I was conceptualizing the class is like, what is the Inquisitor in a fantasy RPG setting? If you look at other games that have the Inquisitor in it, like Pathfinder, for example, the Inquisitor is kind of like not really clearly defined. They kind of do a little bit of everything. They can kind of heal. They have limited magic. They're okay at fighting. They have investigative skills. So they're kind of like a jack of all trades, and they have a bunch of subclasses that are more focused. So I was always kind of like, I always really liked the idea of the class, but I didn't ever really want to play it because it was kind of like, eh. And then they had these teamwork feats that came in later that were cool, but it was like, is that really what you think of when you think of an Inquisitor? For us, the Warlord class, who's like the battlefield commander, that's much more of the teamwork type archetype. If you look at CRPGs like Dragon Age, Inquisition specifically, but the whole series, Inquisitors are kind of like whatever you want them to be because it's the main character, so they kind of have to do it that way. But it's like, okay, they kind of fight, supernatural / demonic forces. Okay, that kind of feels right. And if you look at other settings, like for example, Warhammer, the Warhammer setting, Inquisitors have like insane levels of authoritative power. They can blow up whole worlds, right? If they deem that that's what's necessary. And again, like the through line is that they hunt down supernatural or existential threats, right? And if you look in history, the Inquisition is a really dark time in human history. Now there's been multiple types of Inquisition, but the one we usually think of is the Spanish Inquisition. Obviously, in my opinion, not good guys, but they have really cool outfits, and that's kind of inspired all the other fantasy Inquisitors. The Catholic Church, whatever you think about them, their style is on point, right? So the Inquisition, they look cool. They had the kind of like formal attire, the colors and everything are really prevalent in fantasy representations of them. But, in a historical setting, they were kind of like religious fanatics, religious investigators. They were associated with some sort of religious order, and their job was to seek out heretics and apostates, and they were judge, jury, and executioner, often doing really terrible things like torture and execution, often by fire. So they're kind of grim in a historical context, and I wanted to lean into that for Bloodthrone because I had this idea for a character, Inquisitor Calth, who is the main character in the core box, as an evil Inquisitor. Because in fantasy settings, they usually kind of take on the role of a good guy that does bad things, or like an anti-hero, but they're still doing kind of good things. And I was like, it'd be cool to lean into the idea that they're not good guys at all. They're bad guys doing bad things, but they believe that they're doing it for a righteous cause. To me, that was a really interesting idea. So we wanted to go with this concept of like an evil Inquisitor. So taking the next step, okay, well, what does that mean in terms of game mechanics? Like conceptually, it's very clear, right? They're a religious, fanatic or true believer, and their job is to root out heretics and apostates. So what would you need to do that, right? So you'd be kind of an investigator. You'd have to be pretty competent as a fighter. But the main thing that came to me, I was like, oh, okay, the Inquisitor would be, if their job is to go get you, then it would be really useful for them to have the ability to stop you from using your special abilities, right? So in Bloodthrone, all supernatural abilities, which the champions or the heroes of the setting are able to do, they draw on this spiritual energy called Zenithé, is what we call it in the game. And Zenithé is like soul juice, for lack of a better description. It's basically the animating essence of all living things, especially sentient things. And it was gifted to them by Zenith, who is the goddess of creation. She's like the chief overgod who is now dead in the game. She was murdered by Hasathan, the overgod of destruction, who is also now dead. So there are no overgods in the setting. It's part of the reason why it's so dark. So the Inquisitors were taught by Hasathan how to cancel the flow of Zenithé to a champion or a hero. Right, so the average person, we call them Kith, which is a broad term that refers to all mortals. Sorry, I keep having a cough. So they're called Valsan. We have a whole phonetic system for describing the various celestial creatures that live in the immortal realm and then mortals. So Valsan or sentient mortals, more commonly called Kith. Not all of them can draw on Zenithé. Basically, those that prove themselves worthy by whatever metric their culture defines that as, their Deva or their demigod, which is responsible for their culture, gives their champions access to this flow of Zenithé so they can do superhuman things, right? So that's how a wizard casts Fireball. That's how a rogue turns invisible and fades into the shadows. That's how all these champions are able to do these, superhuman things. It's this connection to their god that allows them to do it. So the Inquisitor, then, they're able to cut off the flow of that power to other champions, right? So it gives them the ability to stop whoever they're trying to capture, interrogate, or assassinate, or whatever kind of like dastardly thing they're doing. Gives them the ability to stop them from doing their special abilities. So this makes them exceptionally powerful, right? Anyone who is a tabletop gamer, which I'm assuming everybody listening to this is, understands that in any game, counter abilities are exceptionally strong. They can also be really frustrating, so you have to be very careful in how you apply them. In Bloodthrone, each faction will have one class that specializes in counter abilities. So obviously in the core box, it's the Inquisitor. In the hero expansion, the adherents to Zenith, they're, good guys, although it's all morally gray. They get the Demon Hunter. The Demon Hunter also has the ability to shut down special actions. The Demon Hunter plays a lot differently than the Inquisitor, though, and when we get to that, I'll explain it. But basically, the Inquisitor is like the ultimate, screw what you're trying to do class. The Demon Hunter is more of a warrior that also can deny you. That's the differentiation between them. So in PvE, this is extremely strong because some of the monsters, especially the boss monsters, have really, really powerful abilities. And the Inquisitor, positioning them correctly so that they can stop that, can win you the game. And in PvP, it's the same thing, but obviously a human opponent is smarter than the scripting for the AI scripting for the monsters. They're going to try and take out that counter class. Often in PvP, players would prioritize taking out that character even above a healer, right? Like that's how influential they are on the tabletop. So really, really good class, and we'll dive into each aspect of what makes them so cool. But that's kind of the top-down overview of what makes the Inquisitor special. So to go into the mechanics of it, the Inquisitor's core ability, it's called Inquisitorial Training. It's a reactive action. So reactive actions are amazing. So they can be done while your hero is not the active model, meaning you do it in another monster or hero's turn. And what that does is it frees up the Inquisitor to use their own actions to do stuff on their turn. They can attack, they can go for objectives, they have a bunch of other abilities to debuff their opponent or deal damage. So it makes them very action efficient. And what's even more powerful is that when they do deny another model's special action, they can't do it to to mundane actions. Like if a fighter is just trying to hit you with their sword, you can't stop that. It's only a special action. What makes it so strong is that not only does it stop the action, it also takes away that action, right? So if you, like, for example, if a wizard tries to cast a fireball, the Inquisitor stops it. The wizard not only doesn't cast a fireball, they lost that action. And basically all special actions, with a very few exception, in Bloodthrone can only be attempted once per activation. So they can't even try it again in most cases. Like 95% of the cases. So it's a very, very powerful ability. And it's what these denial classes can do once per activation. Now, what makes the Inquisitor special is that they can deny metaphysical or physical special actions. And as a refresher, all actions in the game are broadly categorized as either physical or metaphysical. And each faction also has access to a class that has limited denial abilities for physical or metaphysical. For example, the Warlord, which we already covered, she can deny physical actions, but she's not as good at it as the Inquisitor. And then a class like the Transmuter, which is in the hero expansion, can deny metaphysical actions, but not physical. And again, they're not as good at it as a dedicated denial class. So in your full suite of classes, for most factions, you're going to have a denial specialist, a physical denial, and a metaphysical denial, so that no matter what characters are available to you, you should have at least one character that can do some form of denial, unless you take all three in one game, in which case you run the risk of not having any of them in the next game if they all get injured. For equipment restrictions for the Inquisitor, they don't really have very many. So broadly speaking, again, as a refresher, there's martial archetype classes, skill archetype classes, and arcane archetypes classes. Martial are your warriors, the people that do physical damage, the rogue, the fighter, the barbarian, the ranger. Skill archetype classes have some sort of a shtick. Like, they do something cool, like the bard has songs, and then they have shouts, and the Inquisitor can deny. And then there's the arcane classes, which are your wizards and your healers and things of this nature. They use magic. So all of these archetypes have broad equipment restrictions. The martial classes have the least. They can take the heaviest equipment, armor. The arcane classes have the most, and the skill classes are kind of in between. So the Inquisitor doesn't have any additional restrictions beyond skill archetype class restrictions, which means they can't wear the heaviest armor, the heaviest shields, or use the heaviest weapons. So what this means is the Inquisitor is really, really customizable. Like, you have the sky's the limit almost, right? Like, Calth in the core box has medium armor, a hand crossbow, and a whip. This lets him shoot at medium range. He has a reach range light weapon. He has pretty good armor. Medium armor is really effective. But if you wanted to, you could build an Inquisitor that had medium armor, a shield, and a sword to go maximum defense. Or you could go light or no armor or cloth armor and give him a crossbow so that they kind of hang back and try to avoid being hit, but they can shoot really effectively. There's a ton of options. Like, you can really customize your Inquisitor, which is one of the most fun things about it. In playtesting, we came up with all kinds of wacky combinations. And really, with the model, visually, you just want to give some cue that it is an Inquisitor. Although, within the world of Bloodthrone, there's room to kind of like do what you want, but we leaned into sort of an aesthetic that helps to make it, okay, if you see a big hat on the model, probably Inquisitor, but you come up with other ways to represent it. But they're really, really flexible. They can be equipped with a wide variety of weapons and equipment. So the class ability for the Inquisitor, we already covered it. Inquisitorial training. It's medium range, it requires line of sight, and it goes against an action threshold. So a lot of actions that are kind of like reactive, or they interact with non-models, like, for example, disarming the trap on a chest, or disarming a trap in general, you're going to have a set action threshold that you roll against, right? So in this instance, it's 4. And so what this means is, normally when you perform an action, you're performing it on another model, and they'll have a specified defense that you're going to roll against, and they add that many block dice, the blue dice, into the dice pool. You add your action modifier and you use the difference. So with this, and a lot of reactive actions are this way, it goes against a set threshold. So it's always 4, right? So then the Inquisitor will take their denial attribute, the amount of dice it tells you to use. Calth in this case is 4. And then you compare that to the action threshold and roll the difference. So in this case, they cancel each other out, and you're just rolling the action dice. So that's how action thresholds work. Now, the key with this ability is it does require line of sight, and it is medium range. So positioning with the Inquisitor is critical, right? You don't usually want to get too far forward because it's going to limit the field of squares that the Inquisitor can deny, unless you equip them for melee and you don't mind that. Because again, all models have 180-degree line of sight forward. Anything behind them they can't see or interact with in most cases. And so you want to really think about where you position the Inquisitor. That's why I personally like to give them a ranged weapon so that they can still shoot things, but while staying behind the frontline melee heroes. For upgrades, you can take, at level 4, you can upgrade the range to +1 square. Now, again, this doesn't sound that great at first, but a lot of abilities also have, a lot of other class skills and other classes also have the ability to increase their range by +1 square. The reason you do this not only is to interact with more squares on the map, but because it specifically lets you use your ability from outside of the range of being denied. So if a wizard has +1 square range, they can position themselves to be able to cast a spell from beyond medium range of the Inquisitor, thereby not being denied. So then if you also take this upgrade, you've canceled out, you've countered the counter, right? So whenever you do something like this, I recommend that you twirl a fake mustache and make a diabolical laugh, right? Whenever the Inquisitor does something annoying, your opponents will love it, I assure you. At level 6, you can take an upgrade called Skill Denial, which lets you treat the swirl symbols on the action dice as hits. So each of the d8s, you always roll 2 d8s when you're taking an action test of the orange dice. Each has 1 swirl, right? So this increases the odds of successfully using your denial by quite a bit. It's a pretty significant statistical increase. At level 8, you have the choice of 2 options. Both are extremely strong. Endless Denial lets you attempt to deny a second action per activation. Obviously, it's very strong. If you do this, you get stunned, meaning you lose an action in your next activation. Or you can get Punishing Denial. And this is whenever a monster or hero targets the Inquisitor and you deny it, they take 3 raw dice of damage, which is quite a bit, and it ignores damage reduction. So either of these are very powerful abilities, and it really takes the Inquisitor to the next level on their ability to control the flow of the game and what actions opposing models are taking. As an aside, there's a level 7 general feat. General feats are available to all classes. It's called Zenithé Feedback. And whenever a model with this feat has one of their class skills denied, the model that denied them takes 2 raw dice of damage. So if you're getting really annoyed by getting some of your abilities shut down, especially by like a wizard, you can just do passive damage to them whenever they do that. So it's a fun feat upgrade for classes that really don't like that. And it may discourage another model from trying to deny their abilities. So the primary skill tree of the Inquisitor is Denial, obviously. At level 1, they have the choice of taking a class skill called Strip Curse. So this skill allows the Inquisitor to remove a curse from an allied model. Curses are game-long debuffs, and they can be extremely debilitating. Like, they can make it so you can't heal for the rest of the game, or you have an accuracy of 0 or metaphysics of 0, which is brutal, right? Like, if you have a ranger that absolutely relies on his accuracy stat to hit anything with his bow, and he gets hit with a curse that makes him accuracy 0, he's going to be missing all the time. And it's really difficult to remove a curse once it's in play. The Inquisitor is one of the few ways to do this. There's also some items you can buy and some general skills that can let you do this as well, but they're all once per game. The Inquisitor can do it every turn, right? So if you see that you're going to be playing against a monster or a hero that's going to be throwing around curses, this is a great ability to take. At level 4, the Inquisitor gains See the Unseen. This is another extremely useful ability. So what this does, medium range, and if the action is successful, you remove the hidden or invisible status from an opposing model. Obviously, you don't need line of sight to use this ability, otherwise it would be horrible. So it's really strong. It's really, really, really strong. So there's classes and monsters like that rely on stealth, like the assassin monsters that are constantly making themselves untargetable outside of short range, which is roughly 4 squares. And it makes it extremely difficult to deal with them. The rogue is another class that heavily relies on this. The arcane trickster in the hero expansion can cast invisibility onto an allied model, so they can make, a really powerful melee character invisible, so they can go up the table without being targeted at all. It makes it extremely difficult to do anything to them. There's also an invisibility potion in the merchant deck that you can buy. So it's a very strong defensive ability, and the Inquisitor can take that status effect off them. So it's very, very strong, and it obviously benefits your whole party, not just the Inquisitor. At level 6, the Inquisitor gets an absolute doozy of an ability. It's called Reflect Skill. Once per game, when the Inquisitor is targeted by a special action, they can bounce the special action back onto the person that did it. Really strong in PvE, particularly. It's really good because the monsters don't take into account the AI script isn't sophisticated enough to be like, oh well, the Inquisitor might bounce an ability back at you. Don't do it. They just do it. So it's fun. It's funny. When a monster does a big superpower and the Inquisitor's like, yoink, how about you get it? It's really, really fun. In PvP, a player is going to be smarter than that, and they're probably going to avoid hitting the Inquisitor with a powerful ability, or they might just try and bait you into using it by hitting you with weaker abilities. So really strong, obviously once per game, as it is such a powerful ability. The Inquisitor's secondary skill tree is debuffing, so if it wasn't annoying enough to deny abilities, they can also make their opponents weaker. At level 1, they get access to Strip Blessing, so this is the same thing as Strip Curse, but it works on an opponent. Blessings are the inverse of curses. They're game-long buffs. They're very, very strong. They can make a hero much more effective, so the ability to take these off of them is very powerful. Again, put this card in your deck if you're playing against a monster that's going to be buffing other monsters, which is pretty common, or buffing themselves, which is more common, or against a hero that specializes in buffing other heroes, like the Shaman, for example. At level 2, you get an amazing ability. It's called Jabberwock Dander. So good. So it's like imagine it if it's like a Batman style, shark repellent that he keeps on his belt. It's a little bomb that he throws. It does a modest amount of damage. But in addition to that, if it is successful, the target model gains the Confused status effect. The Confused status effect is brutal. While it's in effect, it lasts 1 turn. The model cannot use any special actions. So this is absolutely devastating. The Confused status effect is one of the most powerful in the game. So against like a wizard or a skill class where they're less fighting and they're more doing cool special abilities, it can really, really, really hamper their ability to do anything. Against a martial class, it's not as effective because they can just fall back on punching you in the face, but a great ability. And it's one of those cards that you almost always take because it's just so good. At level 10, the Inquisitor gains their ultimate class skill. As a quick reminder, when you hit level 10, which in a campaign, it's usually only a couple of heroes will get to level 10. But when you do, you automatically get this card. You just put it in your deck. You don't have to use one of your class skills. They're always once per game, and they're always bananas. They're always ridiculous, which is what makes them so fun. The Inquisitor gets Mindworm Venom. So it's a throw action. So he throws another kind of potion little bomb, Batman style, super concoction that he whipped up. If it is successful, the target model loses one of their special abilities for the rest of the game, and it's the Inquisitor's choice. So this is, in PvE, it's amazing. It's so good because some of the boss monsters can be really difficult to deal with, and this just makes it dramatically easier to deal with it. And in PvP, it's like table flip inducing. You're like, I'll take away your ultimate ability, or like a core ability to a class, Call Lightning from the Druid, which is their bread and butter ability. Like, nope, you can't use it for the rest of the game. It's really, really good. So to polish off this impressive skill set, the Inquisitor's tertiary skill tree is DPS, or striking, is what we call it. It's doing damage, so that they can contribute to taking out opposing models instead of just debilitating them. So at level 1, the Inquisitor gets a really, really good ability. It's called Burning Judgment. So what this does is it modifies an attack, a melee attack action. You can't do it at range. And when the Inquisitor hits someone in melee, if they successfully hit their target, it also sets them on fire. And again, DOTs, the first time a model activates, they take 2 red dice of damage. The next turn, they take 1, and then it goes away. But what we find in practice is the Inquisitor just keeps hitting somebody, and every time they activate, they take 2 red. So we felt not only was this a fitting, thematic ability, it really helps to offset the Inquisitors. Typically speaking, they're not going to be doing a ton of damage. And the reason why, you could spec an Inquisitor to do a lot of damage, but then they're going to not be as good at other things. With frequently with skill classes, you have to spread their stats around to do a lot of different things. So what this means is that the Inquisitor's oftentimes not really packing a wallop. Although again, you could make an Inquisitor that hits hard if you want to. So this helps to offset that. so that the Inquisitor is consistently doing damage over the course of the game. At level 8, they get an extremely powerful ability. It's called Banish. So every faction has a limited amount of these one-shot, one-kill class skills. They're always once per game for obvious reasons, and they're very limited in scope. So the Inquisitor, theirs is called Banish, and it can only be targeted on summons. So summons are really prevalent in the game. Monsters summon other monsters, and in heroes particularly, almost always will use a summon because it's like an expendable party member. They're just really, really useful. And the Inquisitor has the ability to banish them back to where they came from. So again, once per game, if it's successful, you just kill the summon. And in the hero expansion, there are some heroes that have a once per game ability that will just kill another hero or monster. Really strong. So for feats, the Inquisitor has 2 tracks. And again, as a really quick reminder, all heroes get general feats at levels, odd levels 1 through 9. General feats are available to all classes. At level 1, you get 2. At all other levels, you get 1. And all classes have custom feats that are available only to them at levels 2, 4, 6, and 8. Apart from level 1, you can only pick 1, and they're permanent choices. And they usually emphasize one aspect of the class or the other. So the Inquisitor, you can either make them better at denial or you can make them better on offense. So at level 2, you can either take Soul Disruption, which increases your denial stat by 1. The denial stat is what the Inquisitor uses for most of their abilities. They use denial and accuracy are their 2 main. Or you can take Slayer of the Blessed. And what this does is it gives you +1 advantage every time you target an opposing model that has any kind of buff on them, which can be an Inspiration, which is a 1-turn buff, or a Blessing, which is a game-long buff. So the first one, obvious, just makes the Inquisitor better at denying. It's great. It's what most people end up taking. But if you want to make an Inquisitor that is more punchy, Slayer of the Blessed is really good. So advantages, as a really quick reminder, in Bloodthrone, once you're playing the game, you're basically looking at your stat, you're looking at the other stat, and that's it. There's extremely limited number of ways to change those numbers because we wanted to make it easy. We wanted it to be mentally easy. You're not like constantly adding and subtracting stuff. So in order to have in-game buffs, we use Advantage. Advantage can manipulate 1 die to change the symbol, right? So if you rolled a critical failure, you could ignore it. Or if you had a swirl and you would have missed, you can activate it to hit, or they can activate critical hits. So that's how they work. They increase the odds that you are successful in doing what you're doing, and they increase the odds of you getting critical hits. So the Inquisitor, you can start speccing them up with these buffs so that anytime someone's buffed up, they're better at attacking them. At level 4, you can choose between Reaching Denial, which I already explained. It gives you +1 square, which just really helps with not letting opposing heroes or monsters do what they want to do from outside of your range to stop them. Or you can take Unrelenting. This one is really cool. Anytime an opposing model targets the Inquisitor with a curse, the Inquisitor gets a free denial against that ability without getting the denied status. So really, as a quick refresher, all heroes have the ability to do an all or nothing deny or it's called resist or dodge. So if it's a metaphysical action, you could try and resist it. If it's a physical action, you can try and dodge it. And if it's successful, the action has no effect, but then you gain either the resisted or dodge status effect, which means in your activation, you can't do anything except move and defend. So it's like you do it when you're about to get like knocked out and you're like, oh crap, I don't want to die. And it goes against a static action threshold of 9. So it's difficult to do. But this is like, it's really cool. It just means like people are probably like monsters. It's just a free denial because they're still going to try and target you. And again, in PvP, they're probably going to just not try to put a curse on you because it's just not worth it in a lot of instances. At level 6, you can take Skill Denial, which I already explained. It increases your odds of denying. It's very, very good. Or you can take Slayer of the Blessed, which, like Blessed Bane, gives you +1 advantage, and these do stack. So if you want to make a super lethal Inquisitor, you can double stack these. You can take the Unrelenting And you can make it so that your Inquisitor just runs up the table and no one's going to target him with a lot of these abilities, especially if you have like Reflect skill. And it makes your Inquisitor kind of like, I'm not going to mess around with him. I'm just going to try and fight him. And then you make him really good at fighting. And the more buffed, or if anyone's buffed up, you become increasingly better at taking him out. It's kind of fun as an alternative way to spec out your Inquisitor. And then level 8, we covered those feats already, but basically you can try and deny a second time at the cost of an action in your next activation, or to kind of fit into the theme I was just describing, anytime someone tries to target you with an ability and you deny it, you do damage to them. So it just, if you want, you can fully spec out an Inquisitor to be like, don't you dare try and target me with any abilities. Right? So I think that you can make a really powerful warrior Inquisitor by doing that, by speccing it out on all the other side of the tree. Or conversely, in which, frankly, most players did it in playtesting, you can make them just better and better at denying. So I think with experience, like, on a second playthrough or something, you're like, you know what, I'm going to spec the Inquisitor. Let's just see how it goes to make him, basically almost invulnerable to special actions personally and increasingly better at fighting. All right, playing Inquisitor Calth. So Calth was the most fun character to write by a mile. We really, really had fun with it. So he is unequivocally a villain. He is not a good guy at all. All of the other heroes in the core box have a reason to hate him personally. He's interfered with every other faction in the game. He's responsible for countless deaths, apprehensions of innocent people, interrogation, execution. He's not a good guy at all. But somehow he has done the impossible and got all these other factions to team up and join him under his leadership. So you might be asking yourself, how the heck did he possibly do that? When faced with the existential threat that is Belphegor, and Calth being basically a bit of a fanatic, like he is loyal to Lord Akrathil. He's the big bad guy. Like he's the chief bad guy in the setting who is currently gone. No one knows where he is. So when he sees Belphegor trying to take the place of Lord Akrathil, Cal sees him as an apostate. So he doesn't care if you were his buddy at one point. If you're trying to mess with the established order, he's not having it. So he got all of the other factions to join together, and using his insider knowledge of how the Immortal Host works, he's able to give them a fighting chance to stop Belphegor from becoming a god tyrant. When we were writing him, I told the team, I was like, hey, like this guy is like Dr. Doom, right? He's brilliant, ruthless, dangerous, but he's also guided by an internal code of ethics and logic that may not make sense to others, but it does to him, right? So he's just a fun character, right? Like he's a villain that you love to hate. He's extremely competent and totally ruthless. So on the tabletop, Calth is one of the most powerful models, if not the most powerful model of all the core heroes. He doesn't do a lot of damage, but he's really good all around. He's got pretty good defense. He has evasion 4, fortitude 3, will 4, which is good. It's not great, but it's good. He also has medium armor, and he has 15 hit points, which again, it's not great, but it's good. Kind of across the line, he's got competent defense, which means that you're not going to one-shot him outside of very rare circumstances. Excuse me, I keep coughing. Outside of rare circumstances, so he's pretty durable. And offensively, he's got pretty solid stats. He has accuracy 3, denial 4. He has a power of 2, but his weapons aren't very strong. He has a whip. A whip is the weakest weapon you can take, but it's a one-handed light weapon that has reach, and the reach is the key component. So it lets him attack people from outside of their range to attack him back. And again, he's not trying to do really a lot of damage to you with his whip. He's using it to set you on fire with Burning Judgment. Now, as you level up and you go through the game, you can take upgrades that make the whip do raw damage, which in that instance, it starts to get a little spicy. You can actually start doing some serious damage. But really, you're just using your whip to attack, set him on fire, and keep him away from you. And by the way, that's why he has a flaming whip in the art, is because of that combo that we use so much in playtesting. In his offhand, he has a hand crossbow. A hand crossbow is a medium range weapon. It only does 3 damage. The whip only does 2. Again, he's not trying to do a ton of damage, but with power 2 and the crossbow, it lets him shoot, like try to finish off monsters or shoot like arcane classes that don't have a lot of HP or defense. And it lets him be a threat at any range. And the other cool thing about the hand crossbow is it has the pistol keyword, which means you can shoot it in melee if you need to. So all ranged weapons can only be used once per activation. But let's say you use your whip, set somebody on fire, and then you want to shoot them with the crossbow, which does more damage. It gives him a lot of flexibility. It lets him be active at any range, because the way he's built, he wants to kind of hang back, stand behind, Ajax and Kijo, and uses denial abilities while still contributing to damage. One of the limitations of Calth is he starts out with 3 class skills, which isn't bad, but the Inquisitor has so many really, really good skills that as you level them up, you're going to want to start taking abilities that give you more class skills. Like, for example, at level 3 and level 7, as a general feat, everyone can take Journeyman Training and Master Training, which gives you another skill. There's also a magic item. It's called the Skill Tome, and skill classes can equip it in their accessory slot, and it gives them another class skill. Things like this, you can start adding to him as you go throughout the game to give him more cards in his deck. Because when you're playing the game, you'll notice some heroes that went all in on like offense or defense really don't have that many cards in their deck. It can make it feel pretty limiting. So with Calth, you're probably going to want to take those options as you level up so that you're not like missing out on cards that you really want. So Calth, his heritage, which is like race in other games, is a Sithonian. So in the game, these Kith called Godborn started appearing after the Devas were sent down to the world of Chael to restore order. In the history of the game, there was a time called the Age of Strife when it was just like madness and chaos, and there was just these huge wars, and it was horrible. So the Overgods created the Devas, which are demigods, and sent each Deva down to the world and gave them one geographic location that they were responsible for. So then they unified all the people in their area under one cultural identity, so that they weren't split up based on racial identity, or tribal identity. So over the course of time, these Godborn started to appear in each individual society. Each one is unique to the society they come from, and they reflect both the appearance and the nature of their Deva. So the Sithonians, like for example, as an aside, Song of the Phoenix, who we covered in the last of these, he's also Godborn, but he is Zrisan, which are the mortal children of Zenith, right? So they're born normally, but they're born with these characteristics reflecting their Deva. So Song of the Phoenix is like this beautiful, like somewhat angelic figure, kind of like an Asimir in like a D&D setting. And that's the polar opposite of Calth, who is a Sithonian. And these are the Godborn of Ha-Satan, who is the Overgod of Destruction. So they somewhat resemble like a tiefling, to kind of give you an idea of what they look like. So they're unique to the Immortal Host. They have kind of a fearsome and exotic appearance, so other Kith are often afraid of them. Some Sithonians really don't deal with this well. They don't like it. Calth loves it. He loves unsettling people with his appearance. So the horns that you see on his head aren't on his hat. They're his horns. And he has a tail too. But his horns go through his hat. So they hold his hat in place. It's a feature, not a bug. So that gives you kind of like a background. And each faction, as we go through the game, will have unique Godborn. So what the Sithonians get is they have a heritage ability. And again, every heritage gets a free card you put in your deck. It's a heritage ability. It doesn't go towards your class skill limit. And it's kind of what makes the choice of what your race is unique. It's like their racial ability. So the Sithonian heritage ability is called Diabolic Luck. It's really flexible. It's very good. So anytime that model declares an action, or an action is declared targeting the Sithonian, they can either give themselves +1 advantage or take 1 advantage away from the acting model. It's really good. It's very flexible. If you need to try and dodge, you can give yourself +1 advantage to increase the odds. If you need to make sure you get the power off, you can do that. Or if you really don't want someone to hit you with a powerful ability, you can take away one of their advantage. It's just an all around really good, very flexible ability. As a further aside, Kalth is the party leader. This is a mechanic we haven't discussed yet. So in every party in Bloodthrone, you pick one of your heroes to be your party leader. This has two benefits. First, they get an extra stat boost point. So to give you a quick rundown on how this works, all heroes get 7 stat points and 1 stat boost point. So stats, any of the stats in the game, might, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, etc., can go up to 3. A stat boost point can take a stat to 4, but every stat can only be boosted 1 time. So once a stat's boosted, that's it, it's done. And it can't go above 4. So all heroes have 7 stats and 1 boost point. And that, like, for example, that's how Ajax has might of 4. The party leader gets a second boost point. So they in total have essentially 9 stat points. Although again, the way the boost point works, there are some limitations. So it makes them just flat out better. But more importantly, they are immune to the exhausted hero state. What that means is normally when a hero plays in 2 games in a row, they become exhausted and they can't play in a third. They have to take a turn off to rest. Your party leader is immune to this. So this is extremely strong. The stat boost point is cool. This is the bread and butter. So what this means is you have much higher odds of being able to use this hero when you want them to. So you have to, when you're making a custom party, you have to really think long and hard about who you want your party leader to be. It's easy to fall into the trap of picking your favorite hero, but oftentimes in playtesting, we found that picking like a healer or a skill class, someone that doesn't get knocked out very often, right? Someone that kind of hangs back, but has really, really useful abilities like the Inquisitor, you're going to get more mileage out of it because it doesn't make them immune to being injured. If they get knocked out, they still have to take a break, but they can't get exhausted. So any hero that doesn't get knocked out very frequently, you're going to get a lot of mileage out of this. So it's a really fun mechanic in the game, particularly in PvP, that lets you really focus in, dial in on a hero that you really want to use to have available to you more frequently. When you're playing against Kalth, it's always a bit of a frustrating experience. You want to make sure to try and take him out as quickly as you can, or to play around him, and I'll explain how to do that. So again, as I explained, Kalth's defense is good, but it's not great. And one of the best things to do is hit him from long range. The Ranger Grey Wolf he's great at this. He does a ton of damage, and he can act at long range, which is line of sight. So any square on the board he can see, he can hit. And he does a lot of damage, right? So if Grey Wolf gets 2 full strength shots into Kalth, he usually will kill him, unless Kalth is leveled up a few times and he's got more HP. So Grey Wolf is great, or anyone, if you're playing a custom party, anyone with a long range weapon, which crossbow, longbow, arquebus, things of this nature. The rogue or any quick class like the monk, the rogue, the warlock, someone who's really quick and does a lot of damage in melee is also very good for taking him out. The rogue is great at it because you can be in stealth mode. Just bear in mind, if you take a rogue and you're playing against Kalth or another Inquisitor, they're probably going to take See the Unseen, which will take it off of you if you can see you. So you have to be really careful in the way you do it. But any fast hero that can move through other models, the Barbarian is another one that can do this, is going to be really good. The heavy melee characters, like the Fighter and the Barbarian, if they can get to grips with him, will beat him to a pulp very quickly. But you have to be smart about it, because if you don't kill a really important character like this, you can bet your bottom dollar your opponent's going to heal him immediately, right? So you really have to try it. When you're going for it, you really have to try and take him out. Now, another way to deal with this that doesn't involve brute force is model positioning. So the Inquisitor can't be everywhere at once, and they can't deny abilities behind them. So if you split your party up and kind of go on flanks, or have, a couple go up the middle and some go around the flanks, there's also some abilities that can make you come on from board edges. This can be a really, really good way to deal with them, because if you can get behind the Inquisitor, he can't deny you, unless they defend, and you can go and take him out relatively quickly. So you just want to be smart about it, and when you're playing PvP, since you alternate selecting heroes, if someone's taking their Inquisitor or their Demon Hunter, you want to take models that don't absolutely rely on special abilities, or they can use special abilities from a really long way away to bypass their defenses. And then, obviously, one of the best ways to counter the counter class is to counter the counter class, right? So if you can hit them with the Confuse status effect, it's absolutely devastating for the Inquisitor and the Demon Hunter, because they can't counter you. So anything you can do to put Confused on them, you get massive mileage out of it. Or trying to deny their deny, which then you get into this loop, which is funny because neither one of them ends up doing anything, but it does work. But it's also really funny. So thanks for tuning in. Oh, before I forget, I did want to mention there is an item in the merchant deck that you can buy for 2 gold. It's called a denial scroll, and it lets you basically do what Calth does, but it's only for metaphysical actions. So if you for whatever reason don't have access to metaphysical denial, or you just want a little bit of extra counter punch, you can take a counter scroll, equip it onto any one of your characters that has a good denial stat, which usually any arcane class and a lot of the skill classes will have a really good denial stat. You equip them with this item, and then once per game, you can attempt to deny a metaphysical ability. So don't fret. There's ways for you to get into the denial game too, as long as you have a couple extra gold. So anyway, thank you so much for joining me. I'm sorry if I sound off. I got hit hard with this cold. Not feeling at my best. And we'll be finishing out the skill classes with the next in-depth series. And we'll be diving into the Alchemist. The Alchemist, despite seeming somewhat humble, is definitely one of the all-stars. And definitely was the most popular class in playtesting. So looking forward to that. Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you next time.